Welcome to China Tech Talk, a weekly discussion of technology and startups here in China. I am John Artman, editor-in-chief of Techno.com. So this episode is part 2 of 2 looking at Huawei's internal culture. We pick off where we left off from the last episode, so I highly recommend that you listen to that episode first before you listen to this one, and the link, of course, will be in the show notes.
Yeah, and this is how it's such a microcosm for, I think, China and the world in general. Is that, like, you look at Belt and Road and you look at what kind of Xi Jinping's kind of goals and ambitions are. A lot of it is kind of what Huawei has done as a company, is to say, well, like, we can try to engage through these standard practices. Huawei said we could try to do kind of a traditional Western style corporate governance and operate in this way. The way that Lenovo has, or we can just create our systems ourselves. And that's really what, if you look at what China has been trying to do kind of with Belt and Road, is saying instead, and with, the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, excuse me, and these other, kind of their approaches to global power, a lot of it is kind of like this, is in saying, okay, well, we can't, if we try to work within the UN too much, or if we try to work within, the IMF or these traditional institutions for global governance, then we're going to have too much trouble. Like, it's just going to be too mafan. Let's just create our own system. And that's kind of what Huawei has done. But there are tons of these side effects that cause problems as well. And one thing that really helps me understand Huawei is that military background, and to think about the way that China has had, that the PRC itself has had military success, and how similar it is to Huawei. When I read these Glassdoor reviews, what constantly people from Europe, from the US, from Australia will complain about is they will use that term human rights. They'll say Huawei has no respect for human rights, right? And they're willing to kind of just throw resources at a problem until it gets done. And it actually reminds me a lot of kind of the reading more about the Chinese effort in the Korean War, in that the Korean War was a huge success for the People's Republic of China, standing up to what was then to the U.S., which was the biggest military power in the world, just coming off of a big win in World War II, and they basically fought them to a stalemate. How did they do it? They did it by just pouring people in, and just not really caring about human life. And just constantly pouring soldiers into the war. And Mao famously said, even China has 600 million people. Even if we lose half of them, we still have 300 million. But this willingness to just sacrifice people in order to achieve their goals, I think has been key to China's success. So I think for a lot of the Chinese managers, it's what does China do better than anyone else? They can't necessarily, they're innovating more now than they used to, but they still don't innovate better they don't have quality control better. What they do is they can pour resources in, and they could focus, and they could just slam energy into something and not really care about the short term human aspect.
It's interesting as well. I mean, it's not just the Korean War, but China historically, they've done a lot of these huge projects. I mean, obviously the Great Wall is an example, but there's all sorts of different canal projects, deforestation projects, reforestation projects, spanning throughout history. And in both cases, in all these cases, it shows not only kind of a disregard for individual life, but also kind of a disregard for the overall impact. It's more like we're going to do this because we think it's good. And I think that's one of the big problems that a lot of companies are kind of facing right now. Companies that I'm talking to, Chinese companies, but then also our own company, is how do you pivot from a corporate culture of people who think that, for example, they're in HR, so that means that they set the rules and everyone has to follow the rules, versus they're in HR and their job is to support employees, by providing insurance, by providing, helping out with expense reports, helping out with getting visas, and all these things. And I think that what you were just saying really kind of points to that big problem and a huge difference in mentality. I mean, I think it's a bit hackneyed at this point, but it's still quite true, to say that in the West we look at the individual, and in the East, and in China in particular, they look at the group. And how that plays out is really, really important. I was having a conversation with one of our listeners, Ed Sander. If you're listening, this is about the conversation that he and I were having, and he was asking me, but John, on the one hand, you say that China focuses on the collective, but then on the other hand, why is it that we see so much selfish behavior? And it's actually a really interesting point that deserves a bit of discussion. And I think a lot of it has to do with in groups versus out groups. And this is true certainly, of the you're either Chinese or you're not, right? You're Chinese or you're foreigner. You're 中国人 or you're 外国人. There's really no in between. When I was traveling with my wife years and years ago to Italy for our pre-honeymoon, or a pre-wedding honeymoon, she was like, "Oh, look at that foreigner." I'm like, "Anna, we're not in China. You're a foreigner too." And so there is that in group out group mentality. And so if you're part of the in group, people will go above and beyond to help you out. And we're talking about Huawei, especially. One of the reasons that, let's say, as you were saying before, for going abroad and doing projects, people will bring people they trust with them. Well, that trust is built on the fact that they know that these people will go above and beyond for them, and then they will go above and beyond for them as well. But then the foreigners, well, automatically, even though, all three of us have been here for a long time, there's no way we're ever going to be part of the broader overall, Chinese in group. And so foreigners are automatically discounted because of that. And then of course it just makes things so much more difficult. But again, I think this idea, looking at Huawei culture, looking at Chinese culture in general, that there is that discounting of the individual, and kind of a bit of a sacrifice for the group, a sacrifice for the country or the family, or the company or the department.
Yeah, I got a question that I don't think was covered in the article too deeply. I'm sure some of the listeners would also be thinking about this. You've mentioned that the compensation. Okay, these Huawei employees, they go through hell, and there's a wolf culture, and they're all competing with each other, but they put up with it because they're compensated well. So exactly how well compensated are they? And how much are Huawei employees being paid over the market rate?
That's the question.
Okay. Well, first of all, a lot of it is based on performance, so they will get they seem to. I don't know the details, but people who I've spoken to talk about lucrative bonuses for hitting targets, promotions for hitting targets, and strong pay raises. But also they have a share plan, so that that people who have been with the company for a long time, they get shares in the company, so that they own part of the company. And as the company increases in value, then they have an asset that they're building. So it is highly possible, because of that share plan, that there could be somebody who is lower ranking, but who has acquired enough company shares over their career with the company, that actually the compensation that they're getting is greater than somebody who joins the company later who is higher ranking, which kind of insinuates or implies this idea of kind of this long-termism, this loyalty, that even if you're not quite as high ranking, if you've been with the company longer, you are kind of more one of them, more part of the system than somebody who isn't.
And so Huawei is not a publicly listed company, right? So these shares are, what happens if they leave? How would they get liquidity from those shares?
From what I understand from speaking with people, now this is, correct me if I'm wrong, so somebody can go ahead and tweet at TechNode, because I'm not 100% sure. But from my understanding, they cannot liquidate their shares at this current moment. That the shares are an asset that they are holding on to build long-term wealth, because eventually the day will come when those shares are liquidatable. But I am not 100% sure about how exactly that works.
And Matt actually got a chance to talk with Salmon, his co-founder at ChinaChat, about the compensation structure and the shares and how exactly that works. It's very interesting, and I think it sheds a lot of light on how exactly that works. There's been a lot of speculation, but Salmon actually has the inside scoop.
So, Salmon, in Huawei, people complain the culture is very harsh, and people have expected to work very long hours, but they're also meant to be compensated quite well. So when people say that Huawei employees are compensated well, how well exactly, and how does that compensation work typically?
I think in the salary wage structure, I think this is three parts. First part is the monthly wage, and also you got the bonus for your performance. The second part, the third part is the shares, which is one of I think a very significant part. So in Huawei's, I think its wage structure is very unique. And Huawei's human resources department is a very powerful department, and he will actually the goal is trying to get the most out of everyone. And usually they were divided to employee into two parts. One is the new graduates, and another one is the old staff. All right, and for new graduates, I know most of them just earn wages, and the wage, as far as my experience, I think the wage is usually 30% higher than the industrial standard. And for this old staff, have several years experience within Huawei, a significant part of their income is from the shares. Right, the share price will be the share will be allocated to people, staff with according to their performance, and every year the shares price will go up, and also they can earn every year they can earn bonus from the shares,
Okay, so the share price is going up. How? Huawei is not a publicly listed company, so how would you gain liquidity from those shares?
What you mean?
I mean, how would you ultimately sell them? Who would you sell them to? How would you exit?
Actually, they cannot. Usually, I haven't heard anybody sell them. It's forbidden. Actually, you cannot sell the shares. The only one you can sell the share is the company itself, and usually is when you quit the company, and the company will a company will not allow you to keep the shares, and there's a very unique policy within Huawei, and Huawei asks people to retire at the age of 45. So at 45, when you quit, when you retired, and you don't earn any wage anymore, but you can keep your shares. So still you can gain the share bonus and the share appreciation. So a lot of people aim to keep the shares. They will not just sell the shares. They just want to get more and more shares.
That's an interesting policy. So you have to retire age 45.
Yes.
Why is that?
I think people. I think in Huawei, human resources is always thinking about how to motivate people. And if you have too many years experience in Huawei, they think you kind of lose your motivation. You kind of sit in your history and not make so many efforts. But meanwhile, you earn a lot, right? The new graduates, so they don't want too many such people. So they will never let you settle. And one of the things I also explored is they will always come up with some policy aiming at those people, who stay in Huawei for quite a few years and earn a lot, even though they are already in management level. No matter you are in a basic management or a middle or higher, it's the same. So we have a saying, actually, the management in Huawei is a very tough job.
So they've got policies specifically designed to unsettle those people, provide, make sure that they still have competitive forces and they don't become very comfortable, rest on their laurels.
Exactly. I have two cases. One is my friend. Actually, he is in the basic management, and in his team is over about 100 people. And quite recently, and he was forcibly sent to domestic market to doing those basic work, like go to the site to set up the communication kind of basic work with new graduate, which is very tough.
Okay, so it sounds a bit like in the 1960s in China with the going back to the countryside with Chairman Mao, they would send you out. Is there some similarity there, that you take the re-education in the countryside? Is that what's going on?
I think that's a very interesting comparison, though I've never thought about that. But in a sense, I think Huawei they don't want you to settle. They don't just want you to sit in a position, in a comfort zone. This is to basic management. I also have some very high management, a director of a department. Actually, Huawei sent him to Africa, because in Huawei we have such a policy. Those who want to go to the most tough area, goes through all these hardships, challenges, will get reward.
Rewarded best.
Rewarded best, yes. So actually, I think that's the director. They already said they have a whole family, right, in Shenzhen. Already settled down, and but they forced him to move to Africa. So when it comes to this company policy is quite harsh. Company will never think about your family. Actually, no, that's true. That's not true. They think about your family, and they do something actually makes you very uncomfortable. They will sometimes they will do it on purpose to make you not stay with your company. Well, not stay with your family. That's kind of harsh. Yeah.
Really? So you're saying they would? There are case studies that you've seen where you feel that they deliberately implemented something to knowing that the new task would take the employee away from their family.
I think there's maybe I put it this way. I think when Huawei he decided where to send these people, all right, he will not think about your family. If you are from, for example, if you are from Sichuan province, he will not send you back to Sichuan province. Okay, he will send you to another place. And
that's a deliberate choice.
Yeah, that's a deliberate choice. And of course, I don't mean that Huawei wants to break up your family. That's not what I'm saying. It's just he said when the policy of this company is so strong, he think people should go to front line to face the challenge. This is how Huawei grows. So when it comes to that point, Huawei will not think about your family so much. But of course, Huawei will encourage you to take your family with you. And he would facilitate that by setting up some policies. For example, if you move to, you go to Africa, right? They will give you a whole apartment, so you and your family, your wife, your children can live inside together, and you can have some I think a bonus because you bring your family there. But they will not consider you if you say I'm in Shenzhen, my family is in Shenzhen, I have a newborn child, you know, can I stay in Shenzhen? That's absolutely no.
Right. So it's not so much a policy of like deliberately trying to break up families. It's more just a policy of like disregard for your personal situation, and actually maybe a little bit proactively trying to make people push their limits, perhaps.
Yeah. To some extent, I can say Huawei's policy culture is a bit against the human nature. So they have to compensating on the way to keep people stay. That's why people complain, but they still stay.
People still stay, in your opinion, mostly because the compensation is
mostly.
But they also get a sense of achievement. I mean, like they from working so hard, I guess, and like getting the results.
Yeah, to some extent, and especially now Huawei is like an international company, number one telecommunication company in the world. So this I think ego, self-driven thing is culture is definitely there. Yeah.
Final question, I guess. Controversial one. So outside of China, there's a lot of talk in media, and people are saying, Huawei is basically a military company, and they have connections with the Chinese army. What's your take on this?
To be honest, I don't have a final say about this, but the bosses definitely have a military background. That's for sure. That's the fact. Mm-hmm. And there's some rumors in that why Huawei doesn't go public is because of the military background, and also the share, because now it issues shares to staff, right? Mm-hmm. It's literally, I think, I don't know the percentage, but there is a very high percentage of employee owns the shares. So the share structure is so complicated, and they make it on purpose. So they don't go public, but how much it owns to the military background, actually, to be honest, I don't know.
Yeah, so that one's the really, I think a lot of people would be interested in the sort of military traditions of Huawei. There's a lot of articles written about it, but it's mostly about Westerners writing, journalists who are either abroad or there's no clear information about it. About the sort of connections there. How could we phrase this? If you're, in your opinion, should foreign companies or governments be worried about those connections?
Sorry, what kind of connections? I don't get it.
With the PLC.
PLC. I think reality in China is if you want to run a company, you have to, especially at the size of Huawei, you have to collaborate with the government. That's a must do. Definitely, my guess is Huawei will compromise in some way to if the government or PLA, right, give some orders that you have to do this, and because of national security or something like that, I think in some way Huawei has to compromise. But this is all, high secret stuff.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, I think Huawei have to make a balance, right? In a sense, in this commercial world, it's just a company. It's a private company. He has to deliver his service to customers and care about customers. So Huawei is trying to maintain the balance, to in the benefit of the customers. And meanwhile, they have to listen to the government. I think that's a must do. I think that's a tough thing for every company. I think in China, like Tencent, Alibaba, they all have to do this.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like it is something that, and it gets conflated outside China, but there is a clear divide between government and a private company which is for profit. They've got to build products that consumers around the world want to use, and that's but at the same time, when they're operating within China, they absolutely have to obey the law, and there's nothing, no company is above that. Okay, cool. Well, Simon, thank you for your time. Is there any way that people can get a hold of you if they want to contact you online?
Yes, and they can contact me at Saminsha, SAMINSHA at ChinaChannel.co.
Okay. Cool.
And also I have a Twitter account.
You got a Twitter? There we go. All right, we'll put it in the show notes. Cool. Thank you for your time, Simon.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Actually, as an interesting aside, just to this whole conversation, today I'm actually in the co-working space in Shenzhen. The room next to me that I'm actually recording from was the old office of Ren Zhengfei, the CEO. Yeah, because this is actually a really central location in Shenzhen. And now that old office space is actually a smoking room that people use for good luck. The idea is you have a smoke in that room, which used to be the CEO's office, which is totally random. I did not plan that to record this here today next to that room, but just wanted to add that in there.
Ren Zhengfei is an interesting character. It's very hard to get a lot of information about him. I mean, with a lot of Chinese CEOs, it's the case, but some are more public than others. He seems to be more private. But you do hear stories. And a lot of it is inconsistent, so I don't know how much is apocryphal, how much is true. But the one that was most frequently told is the story of there is this guy. He's a Huawei executive. He was originally from Beijing. He worked with Huawei for a long time, and his family needed to go to Beijing. Right? He had a wife there. He had his whole family there, and it was mostly about his wife, like his wife's side of the family and everything like that. That was really pressuring him to go back to Beijing. And he told Ren Zhengfei, he said, I need to, my wife wants me to come back to Beijing. Is it possible that I can work remotely? And Ren Zhengfei says, no, get a divorce. But it very much is this, it shows like this mindset that you're expected to have in Huawei, where it's just like total devotion. And when I first started looking into it, I was like, oh, this because I had talked to people. Everyone complains about working for Huawei. The Huawei element, even though I've never worked for Huawei themselves, my interactions with people who had worked for Huawei, I kind of found them to be kind of assholes in some instances, and kind of being like, oh, Huawei represents what I don't like about working with Chinese companies. Lenovo represents what I do like, and that's still somewhat true. But I also have a lot more empathy with kind of the Huawei experience, because what are they supposed to do? Like, I mean, they have their way of doing things, and they're doing it in a way that is kind of messed up to us, but also kind of gets stuff done. And it's the way that they know how to do it. They're not trying to be something that they're not. It's a way that Chinese people get, and it's something they can do better than other people. And so, if you are trying to build a Chinese company culture that really can be on a global level, like, what do you draw from? What do you do? Well, here is something that you can do. This is something you can draw from. And like, it seems really messed up to the rest of us, but like from their point of view, it works. I was talking with I'm not going to say what company he was from, but I was talking with an executive who was doing an overseas expansion for a major Chinese company. And I went to have dinner with him. He sat down and he said, "I read your article about Lenovo and Huawei." And I said, "What do you think?" And he goes, "I'm a Huawei guy. Like, I've never worked for Huawei, but I believe Huawei win." And I said, "Why?" And he's like, "Well, because Huawei gets stuff done. Like, period." And in some ways, it's kind of just, I don't know what to think about it, because like, it's just what a lot of people in China just know. And it's how they know how to operate and how they know how to do things. So you can't really, like, it's difficult to be too critical, because, you know, what else are they going to do? How else do they know how to succeed? And I don't know, you know, what that answer is.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter if the cat's black or white as long as it catches the mouse, right? The results speak for themselves.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So,
but then the other side of it is, as somebody who, you know, is kind of watching the rise of China and watching these Chinese companies, and somebody who has been in them and has known, you know, for me, I'm very reluctant to take, you know, I basically work as a, you know, some sort of kind of freelance consultant, in that I have, you know, 4 or 5 clients at a time. I kind of juggle them. If anyone gets to a point where I don't really like working with them, I can drop them. So and the reason why I've done that is that, like, I don't know if I want to work for a Chinese company, because I don't know if I want to be part of that. And one of the big reasons is, like, when you have this kind of military way of looking at it, I was talking to somebody in researching this article, and they were like, you know, no matter what happens on the outside in China, in a good company, inside it's always war, right? It's always a war if it's a good company. So what this person said.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and here's the thing, though, is that, like, what happens in war? In war, like, shitty behavior, it becomes justified, right? Like, we're not supposed to kill people normally, but in war we can, right? You're not supposed to drop a bomb, but in a war you can, right? And I think that this is also the dark side of Chinese company culture, in that if you're looking at everything like a war, then there is no moral bottom line, right? There is, like, I think this is what I really struggle with, like, really at the core, is like, what's just not okay, you know? So if your one goal is that KPI, like, what's an untouchable line that you can't cross? And I don't know what that is with these companies. You know, is it? I just don't know. And fundamentally, you know, like with Lenovo, they'll have this kind of, like, they have a corporate governance structure that is, you know, very similar to a multinational, and, you know, that there are checks and balances they have in place to kind of prevent that. But with other companies, like, I don't know what that is, and I think that fundamentally, when it comes to my trust of Chinese companies, that's where I really struggle. Is, like, I don't know what they won't do if they're thinking of that mindset, and that's tricky.
It's an argument. I mean, I'll make an argument that I've made on this podcast at least once. I mean, I think that, you know, talking about, for example, you know, intelligence agencies and what let's say China and the U.S. are doing, either abroad or domestically, you know, and it's one of those things where, on the one hand, we could say, yeah, you know, well, if China's doing something, well, the U.S. is probably doing it too. And to be honest, that's I think that's a correct assumption. But the problem is that the two things aren't equal in a sense. At least if you agree with Western values in general. I mean, because so yes, fine. Maybe the U.S. and China and Russia and all these different countries everyone's spying on each other in different ways. All the governments are looking at different ways to, let's say, manage the society. On the one hand, keep people safe, but also make sure that existing structures stay basically stable. And so there's different degrees to which that this is actually done. But at the end of the day, you know, in the States and in the West, at the very least, even though these similar things might be happening. At the very least, we still have due process, and we still have a legal framework that is basically followed. In the case of Edward Snowden and the NSA and all the phone tapping and metadata collection. Yes, of course, that's something that the American people should have known about. But at the same time, there was still a legal process behind that, even though Americans and the rest of the world couldn't necessarily see it. And even the expectation that this should have been public knowledge, or that more people should have known about it, is uniquely Western. Whereas in China, there's nothing like that. There's absolutely nothing like that. And so, it's one of those things where, fine, everyone's doing it, but it's also a question of how you're doing it that I think is really important. And so this idea that, that internal culture should be war, that's based on this assumption of scarcity. And you look at Chinese history, recent Chinese history, of course, and yes, resources have been very scarce. Public services these days are still very scarce. There's a lot of competition for schooling, for medical care, for housing, and things like that. But in general, on a social level, there's a lot of abundance these days, and China is quickly getting past its issues with scarcity. And so the idea that company cultures should stay the same, I think is backwards, to be honest. But also, you can't necessarily equate the effectiveness of an organization purely based on the system that they use. Again, when we compare the U.S. and China, I think one of the most disappointing things that I hear is that the U.S. is very messy and it takes Congress forever to pass a law, and our president is crazy and things like that. And it's like, yeah, fine, you're right, but democracy is messy. It's supposed to be messy. If you want clean edges, well, you come to China and see how that works.
Yeah, and that's it's hard. It's hard for me. I don't really know how to, because so many of these companies, they see that, like, if you want to follow a successful model for globalizing, you follow the Huawei way for a lot of these companies. But I don't know if I don't know how to view it. Like, I don't know if it's something that is to be concerned about, if it's something that is altogether benign, if it is just additional, just really there. Because another side of things, like, a lot of companies do get lazy, like the fact that Huawei stays hungry, like, that is, like, there's nothing, that's a good thing, like to set up a culture that makes sure that your employees, keep their drive. I think that's a good thing. But I don't know. I don't have a clear feeling for where the where the bottom lines are, where the checks and balances are, or I just don't trust them ultimately. And that's, I think, fundamentally, getting at the core of talking about the Huawei people in Huawei don't trust each other. That's what I had somebody send a message. First of all, I wrote that article in September, and I get messages still, at least a few a month, where it's somebody who works for Huawei in Egypt, who works for Huawei in Spain, who works for Huawei in Sweden, right, or wherever, will send me messages being like, I read the article and I found it really true. And one person was saying that there is something called, there's mistrust and there is distrust, is what he said.
No, the question that's I wanted to get in is about, okay, so we've talked a lot about Huawei, we've talked a lot about Lenovo. Where does everyone else fit in this scale? And obviously it might not be a linear scale. There's not just one way that we judge the company cultures, because there can be all different kinds of company cultures. But broadly speaking, who is more on the Huawei side of things, and who is more on the Lenovo side of things when we talk about everyone else in the big picture of China here?
That's a very, very good question. First of all, nobody is quite like Lenovo and Huawei, because also a lot of the companies that are globalizing, they're newer, they're younger, they're fresher, but they are still using their models. I think like for example, I was speaking with an Alibaba person, and she basically had told me she had been a former Lenovo, and she had been like, really, what we're trying to do is, she's like, my boss is a Huawei person. Like we have a lot of Lenovo, a lot of Huawei, and we're trying to build our own identity out of some kind of combination of the two. What I have found is a lot of it depends on the business that they're in, and who the founder is. That generally, how international is the founder, and how much and what kind of business are they in. So you look at, for example, a company like Jingdong. Jingdong has kind of a history of being a bit more local. They are starting their international expansion at the moment, or not really starting, but still in the early stages. But they're also a logistics company, right? So doing things in a more Huawei type way may actually benefit a company like Jingdong, right? Because they have to set up things like, they have to be reliable, they have to get things done, they have to, like, it doesn't matter if they're nice as much, as long as they are able to deliver the goods, literally and figuratively. But if you look at, for example, ByteDance, right, where they're younger, they're more international, and they're also making a product and offering a product that really has to appeal to the sensibility of the user, right? Something that an approach for them may be more something like Lenovo, and you see that in the kind of people that they've hired, who spend a lot of time abroad. They hire a lot more foreigners, so it's hard to say exactly, like, who's having a carbon copy of Lenovo or Huawei, but I think if you look at the kind of business that they're in, and also just the personality of their founders as well, you can kind of get a feeling for what approach they probably would think would be best for them.
Yeah, with the internal competition teams, that to me I know for sure Tencent's company culture is quite similar. It's famously similar for being this Saima horse racing culture, right? So that part seems similar, but then in some respects, the higher management is actually quite international, right? So the president is from Hong Kong. Like they've got like chief strategy officers from the UK. They're top marketing guys from Malaysia. So actually, at the higher levels, they're more international than people realize, much more. And so I wouldn't say that they've got. It is a very different. It's not like Huawei, but there are elements that are like Huawei, and then you look at like Alibaba, for example. Yeah, the founder's very international, but then I know from the people I know who work in Alibaba that they work extremely hard. And they're worked into the ground, some of them, I think. But then they do have a sort of like thing. They also have this like warlike culture of like everything is a struggle, and you're constantly embracing change. And the teams get named after what's it? They also have like a very warlike sort of naming culture as well with the different groups. So yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
And that whole idea of 996, I mean, Huawei works at 996, if not an 810.7. I think that when it comes to the intensity of how a company operates, how Huawei operates, I think that companies have adopted that's the one thing that I think is getting adopted across the board. That no matter what company you're working from, you're adopting Huawei-like intensity, or at least trying to, just because of the nature of Chinese tech. And I think that Huawei has really set the pace for that. And say that you want to be successful, like work out. Like it's a war.
So Elliot, again, thanks so much for taking the time to join us. I think that we weren't worried about being able to fill up 1 hour, and certainly that's true. I think there's a lot more to talk about, and maybe we can get you on at some other point. But before we do go, if some of our listeners want to get in touch with you, where can they find you?
Sure. You can add me on Twitter at Elliot Zaagman. That's ELLIOTTZAAGMAN. Yes, my name is redundant with letters, but you can also find me on LinkedIn at Elliot Zaagman, and if you want to add me on WeChat, that's okay too. Just eZaagman, it's EZAAGMAN, and you can read my stuff because I regularly contribute to TechNode pretty regularly, Tech in Asia, and also Sup China as well.
Yeah, definitely, and we'll put all those links in the show notes. Well, Elliot, thanks again. And that's about all the time we have for this edition of China Tech Talk. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, we'd really appreciate it if you left a review on iTunes, or if you're on Pocket Cast or Overcast, you can tap on that star button and it will recommend this episode to your network. And coming up in September, Matthew is organizing the ChinaChat conference. It happens every year. I believe this is the third year that it's going on. It is a conference dedicated to digital marketing, in particular WeChat, as you can imagine. It features the leading minds in digital marketing and e-commerce here in China. Featuring some of the people that we've had on the podcast, including Elijah Whaley, CMO of Park Lu, and Thomas Graziani, CEO and founder of Walk the Chat. That's going to be on September 20th and 21st in Shanghai, and the registration link will be in the show notes.